Before we start, I want you to think about something for a second. Most people assume that when they're inside their home, they're safe, doors locked, windows closed, nobody else there. But what if someone had already been inside? Tonight's stories include a man watching an apartment from across the street, a hidden camera discovered inside someone's house, and someone secretly living in a basement while the homeowner was upstairs. These are 3 disturbing, true-style scary stories. And honestly, the last one is the kind of story that sticks with you. This happened about 3 years ago, when I was 24. I had just moved into my first apartment after graduating college. It wasn't anything special, just a small 1-bedroom unit in a suburban complex outside Columbus, Ohio, but it was mine, and that alone made it feel like a huge milestone. The complex itself was pretty quiet. Mostly young professionals, a few older couples, nothing sketchy. My building faced a narrow 2-lane road, and across that road was a strip of trees that separated the neighborhood from a large, mostly empty office park. At night, the area got really still. Not creepy, just still. For the first couple months, everything was normal. I worked during the day, came home around 6, watched TV, played games, typical routine. But sometime toward the beginning of October, I started noticing a car parked across the street at night. At first, it didn't seem strange. People park places, but this car wasn't parked in a normal spot. It would sit halfway on the shoulder, halfway on the road, directly across from my building's entrance. The headlights were always off, but the engine was running. I could tell because of the faint vibration of the exhaust and the glow from the dashboard. The first time I noticed it, I assumed someone was waiting to pick someone up. The second time, I figured maybe it was an Uber driver. But then I started realizing it was there almost every night. Same spot, same angle, same car. It was an older dark-colored sedan, maybe a late 2000s Chevy Impala. Nothing distinctive enough to stand out, but recognizable once you paid attention. One night, around 11:30, I went out to grab something from my car. As I stepped outside, I noticed the sedan immediately. And I also noticed something else. The driver was looking directly at me. I couldn't see his face clearly because of the darkness inside the car, but I could feel it. You know that instinct when someone's eyes are on you? That. I tried to play it off like I hadn't noticed, unlocked my car, grabbed my gym bag, and went back inside. When I glanced back, the sedan was still there, engine idling, watching. Over the next week, I started paying more attention. The car didn't show up every single night, but it was there often enough that it became part of the background. Sometimes it would arrive around 9 p.m., sometimes closer to midnight. Occasionally, it would already be there when I got home from work, and it always left before morning. What made things uncomfortable was that it never moved while I could see it. If I checked at 10, it was there. If I checked at midnight, it was there. If I checked at 2 a.m., still there. But when I woke up, it was gone. I mentioned it casually to my neighbor, a guy named Eric who lived across the hall, and he said he'd seen it too, but assumed it was someone from the office park taking smoke breaks or something. That explanation made sense, at least for a while. About 2 weeks later, something happened that changed everything. I woke up around 2:40 in the morning to the sound of my phone vibrating on my nightstand. It was a notification from my security camera app. I had one of those cheap motion detect cameras pointed at my front door, mostly just for package deliveries. The notification said, "Motion detected." Half asleep, I opened the app. The live view showed my apartment door. And nothing else. No person, no movement. I assumed it was a glitch until I checked the recorded clip. The camera had captured about 8 seconds of footage. For the first 3 seconds, the hallway was empty. Then, from the left side of the frame, a shadow moved across the wall. Not a person entering the camera view, just a shadow. Like someone was standing right next to the door, just outside the lens range. The shadow lingered there for several seconds, then slowly pulled back out of view. I remember feeling this cold wave go through my chest, because whoever that was had been standing inches from my door, and they never knocked. I got out of bed and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but when I checked outside through my living room window, the sedan was parked across the street, right in its usual spot, engine running. That was the first night I genuinely felt unsafe in my own apartment. The next day, I reported the incident to the leasing office. They said they'd review the exterior cameras, but since the car was parked on a public road, there wasn't much they could do. That night, the sedan didn't show up, or the night after. For about a week, everything seemed normal again, and I started convincing myself the shadow might have been someone going to another apartment. Until the following Friday. I got home from work around 6:15. The sedan was already there, which was new. It had never been there that early before. As I parked my car, I noticed something else that made my stomach drop. The driver's door opened slightly, then closed again, like whoever was inside had started to get out when they saw me. I went upstairs quickly and locked my door. About 20 minutes later, curiosity got the better of me and I peeked through the blinds. The sedan was still there, but now the interior light was on. And for the first time, I could clearly see the driver. He was a middle-aged man, maybe late 40s or early 50s, with thinning hair and a heavy build. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't smoking. He wasn't doing anything. He was just staring straight ahead, toward my building. And then, slowly, he turned his head and looked directly at my window. I dropped the blinds immediately. That night, around midnight, I heard footsteps outside my apartment door again. Slow, measured, stopping right in front of it. I froze on the couch, barely breathing. No knock, no voice, just silence. Then, a soft metallic sound, like someone touching the doorknob. I grabbed my phone and called 911. While I was whispering to the dispatcher, the footsteps moved away. By the time police arrived 10 minutes later, the hallway was empty. And when I looked outside, the sedan was gone. For the next month, I didn't see the car at all. I started sleeping normally again, started relaxing, convincing myself the whole thing had been coincidence. Until Thanksgiving weekend, I had driven 3 hours to visit my parents. Stayed with them from Thursday through Sunday afternoon. When I got back to my apartment Sunday night, something immediately felt wrong. My hallway light was on. I always turned it off before leaving. At first, I thought maybe I'd just forgotten. But then I noticed my bedroom door was slightly open. I never leave it open. I walked inside slowly, heart pounding. Nothing looked disturbed. No obvious signs of forced entry. But when I stepped into the bedroom, I saw something on my pillow. A folded piece of paper. I picked it up with shaking hands and opened it. Inside, written in black marker, were 4 words. I know you're alone. I called the police again. They searched the apartment thoroughly but found no signs of entry. No fingerprints. No damage to locks. Nothing missing. The officer suggested maybe someone I knew had a key. I knew for a fact no one did. That night, I stayed at a friend's place. The next morning, when I returned to grab some clothes before work, the sedan was parked across the street again, engine running, and this time, the driver's seat was empty. This happened in 2021 when I was living in Phoenix, Arizona. I was 27 at the time and working remotely for a marketing company, which meant I spent most of my day inside my apartment. It was a newer complex, not luxury, but definitely modern, with those beige stucco buildings, palm trees everywhere, and a gated entrance that required a key fob. The reason I mention that is because up until this happened, I felt extremely safe living there. Nothing about the place seemed sketchy. My unit was on the 2nd floor, facing inward toward the pool courtyard. The layout was pretty simple. Front door opened into the living room, kitchen off to the right, hallway leading to the bedroom and bathroom. There was also a small laundry closet near the hallway. For the first 6 months, everything was completely normal. Then one Tuesday morning around 9:30, I got an email from the leasing office. The subject line was, "Maintenance Entry Notification." The email said maintenance would be entering my unit that afternoon to address a plumbing request I had submitted. The only problem was, I hadn't submitted one. At first, I figured it was a mistake. Maybe they sent the email to the wrong unit number. I called the leasing office, and the girl at the front desk checked the system and said, yeah, there was definitely a work order tied to my apartment. Something about a water pressure issue in the bathroom. I told her again I hadn't requested anything. She sounded confused, put me on hold, then came back and said the maintenance tech had already been dispatched for the day, but she'd cancel it. That should have been the end of it. But around 1 p.m., I heard someone unlocking my front door. Not knocking, unlocking. The deadbolt turned halfway before stopping. Then there was a pause. Then the handle jiggled slightly. I was sitting on the couch with my laptop, and the moment I heard it, my whole body locked up. I walked toward the door slowly and said, "Hello?" There was no response. I looked through the peephole. A man was standing there. He was wearing a gray polo shirt and jeans, not a uniform I recognized from the complex maintenance staff. He was holding a clipboard in one hand and something metal in the other, like a small tool. When he heard my voice, he stepped back from the door. "Maintenance," he said, "work order." I told him through the door that I had already called the office and canceled it. There was another pause. Then he said, "Oh, okay," and I heard footsteps walking away. I waited about 30 seconds before checking the peephole again. The hallway was empty. Something about the whole interaction bothered me. Not enough to call the police or anything dramatic. Just off. Later that afternoon, I went down to the leasing office in person and asked if maintenance had come by earlier. The manager looked at the computer and said no maintenance had been assigned to my unit that day at all. That's when I felt the first real wave of unease, because someone had tried to unlock my door with a key. About a week passed with nothing unusual happening. Then one night, I noticed something strange in my bathroom. My shower curtain was partially open. I always kept it fully closed after showering so it could dry properly. It was just a habit. I figured maybe I had forgotten, until 2 days later when it happened again. Then again. It sounds minor, but when you live alone and things start moving around without explanation, it messes with your head. I started paying closer attention to everything. Cabinet doors, light switches, objects on counters. About another week later, I came home from grocery shopping and found my laundry closet door open. I specifically remembered closing it before leaving because the dryer was still warm and I didn't want heat building up in there. This time I knew for sure something wasn't right. I checked the apartment thoroughly. Closets, behind the shower curtain, under the bed, everything. Nothing was out of place. No signs of entry. No missing items. I even checked the front door lock and windows. All secure. For a few days after that, I barely slept. Every little noise sounded amplified. The apartment creaking. Neighbors walking upstairs. Ice maker dropping cubes. All of it felt threatening. Then something happened that escalated things. I came home from the gym around 8 p.m., unlocked my door, and immediately noticed a smell. Cologne. Not mine. I don't even wear cologne. It was strong, like someone had sprayed it recently. My stomach dropped instantly. I walked inside slowly, heart pounding. Nothing looked disturbed, but the smell was strongest near the hallway. I checked the bathroom first. Normal. Then the bedroom. Also normal. But when I opened the laundry closet, the smell hit me hard, and I noticed something on the shelf above the washer. A small black object. At first, I thought it was part of the appliance. Then I realized what it was. A camera. Tiny. About the size of a matchbox. Mounted facing outward toward the hallway. My hands started shaking immediately. I grabbed it and turned it over. There was a micro SD card slot on the side. No branding. No labels. Just a lens. I called the police. They arrived about 15 minutes later and took the device as evidence. The officer told me it was likely a consumer-grade wireless camera, the kind you can buy online easily. The worst part was, there was no sign of forced entry, which meant whoever put it there had access to my apartment. The leasing office changed my locks the next morning and claimed only authorized staff had master keys. But the situation made me extremely uncomfortable. For about 2 weeks after that, nothing else happened. No strange smells, no moved objects, no maintenance emails. I started calming down again. Then one Friday night, around 11 p.m., I heard a noise in my living room. A soft thud, like something bumping against furniture. I was in bed but still awake, scrolling on my phone. I froze, listened. Another noise, this time clearer. Footsteps inside my apartment. My heart started racing so hard I could feel it in my throat. I grabbed my phone and quietly dialed 911. While the call was ringing, I heard my bedroom doorknob move. Slowly, the door creaked open about an inch. I couldn't breathe. I was staring directly at the door, and I saw a shadow move across the crack. Someone was standing there. The dispatcher answered, and I whispered that someone was inside my apartment. The moment I spoke, the door stopped moving. Then I heard footsteps retreating quickly down the hallway. Seconds later, my front door opened and slammed shut. Police arrived within minutes, but whoever had been inside was gone. No forced entry. Again, the officer asked if anyone else had keys. I said no. I moved out the next day. I didn't even finish packing everything. I just grabbed essentials and stayed with a coworker until my lease situation got sorted. A few months later, the detective assigned to my case called me with an update. They had managed to recover partial data from the camera's memory. There were multiple video clips recorded inside my apartment. Most of them were empty, just hallway footage. But one clip stood out. The detective warned me before describing it. The footage showed a man walking through my apartment late at night. He wasn't wearing a mask. He walked casually, comfortably, like he belonged there. At one point, he walked up to my bedroom door and stood there for over 10 minutes, just watching. The case never went anywhere after that. They couldn't identify him. No fingerprints, no forced entry, nothing tying him to the complex theft. To this day, I still don't know who he was. But the thing that bothers me the most is that he clearly knew my schedule, which means he had probably been watching me long before I ever found that camera. This happened in 2018 when I was 19, during my first year of community college. I was still living with my mom at the time in a small town outside of Portland, Oregon. Our house wasn't big, just a single-story place with a basement, but it sat on a decent amount of land compared to most of the neighborhood. We had woods behind us and only one neighbor on each side. My mom worked night shifts as a nurse 3 or 4 times a week, which meant I spent a lot of nights home alone. I never minded it. If anything, I liked having the place to myself. The basement was partially finished, carpeted floors, an old couch, TV, storage area in the back. I used it mostly for gaming or watching movies because it stayed cool down there, even in the summer. The first strange thing happened sometime in early September. I came home from class around 3 p.m., unlocked the front door, and immediately noticed the basement light was on. That wasn't normal. I had been the last one downstairs the night before, and I always turned the light off when I came up because my mom hated wasting electricity. At first, I assumed maybe she'd gone down there before work and forgot. When I texted her, she said she hadn't been downstairs in days. That gave me a weird feeling, but I brushed it off. Maybe I forgot. People forget things. But about a week later, something similar happened again. This time it was the basement door itself. I always kept it closed because our dog used to go down there and get into storage boxes. Even after the dog passed away, the habit stuck. One afternoon, I came home and the door was wide open. Not cracked, fully open. I stood there staring at it for a few seconds, trying to remember if I'd left it like that. I couldn't. But again, I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. That mindset lasted until the night everything changed. It was a Friday. My mom was working an overnight shift, and I had a couple friends over earlier in the evening. We played games downstairs until about 11 p.m. Then they left, and I stayed up watching YouTube for another hour before going to bed. Around 2:30 in the morning, I woke up to a noise. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then I heard it again. A dull thump, like something bumping into wood. It was coming from somewhere in the house. I sat up in bed listening. Silence. Then, a slow dragging sound. Directly below me. The basement. My room was positioned almost exactly above the basement staircase area, so sounds carried pretty clearly through the floor. My heart started pounding immediately. I grabbed my phone and checked the time again, 2:34 a.m. I told myself it was probably the house settling. Pipes. Anything logical. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving across the basement floor. That was the moment I felt real fear, because I knew I'd been the last person downstairs, and I knew I hadn't gone back down after my friends left. I got out of bed quietly and stepped into the hallway. The house was dark except for the faint glow from the kitchen nightlight. The basement door was closed, but I could hear movement behind it. Soft shuffling, like someone walking carefully. I stood there frozen, trying to process what I was hearing. Then, the doorknob moved, just slightly. A faint metallic click. I ran back into my room and locked the door. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped my phone while dialing 911. While I was whispering to the dispatcher, I heard the basement door open. Then footsteps. On the main floor. Inside the house. I remember the dispatcher asking if I could hear where the person was. I whispered that they were in the hallway, right outside my room. Then, my bedroom door handle turned. Once, twice, slow pressure against the locked mechanism. I felt like I was going to pass out. The person stopped trying the handle after a few seconds. Then I heard footsteps moving away toward the living room. Police arrived about 5 minutes later. The officers cleared the house. No one was there. The basement windows were locked from the inside. The doors were locked. No signs of forced entry anywhere. They suggested maybe someone had been in the house earlier and left when they heard me moving around. That explanation didn't make sense, but I wanted to believe it. For the next few weeks, I barely slept. Every noise kept me on edge. My mom installed new locks and even a basic alarm system. Things stayed quiet until October. One afternoon, I went downstairs to grab a box from the storage area in the unfinished part of the basement. That area had exposed beams, insulation, concrete floors, typical unfinished basement stuff. There were shelves along the back wall with old holiday decorations and tools. As I walked toward the shelves, I noticed something on the floor near the far corner. At first, I thought it was trash. Then I realized it was a blanket, laid out flat. Next to it was an empty water bottle and a crumpled fast food wrapper. My stomach dropped instantly because none of that had been there before. Someone had been staying down there, in our basement. I ran upstairs and called my mom immediately. She came home early from work, and we called the police again. This time, the officers did a much more thorough search, and that's when they found it. In the ceiling above the unfinished section, there was a loose panel of insulation. Behind it was a narrow crawl space between the floor joists. Inside that crawl space were more items: food wrappers, a flashlight, clothing, and a small backpack. Whoever had been in our house had been living there, watching us, moving around when we weren't home. The officers believed the person had likely entered through the basement weeks earlier, possibly during a time we'd left the back door unlocked, and had been hiding there since. They never found the person. But the worst part came later. When my mom was cleaning the basement a few days after everything happened, she found something tucked behind one of the storage bins. A notebook. Inside were pages filled with writing. Most of it didn't make much sense. Random thoughts, sketches, dates. But several entries mentioned me specifically. My schedule, when I left for school, when I came home, when my mom worked nights. One line still sticks with me. I almost opened his door tonight. We moved out of that house 2 months later. I've tried to rationalize the situation over the years. Maybe it was a homeless person looking for shelter. Maybe someone with mental health issues. But there's one detail I've never been able to explain. The night I woke up hearing footsteps. The person had come upstairs, which means they weren't just hiding. They were walking through the house while I was there. And if my bedroom door hadn't been locked, I don't know what would have happened.